Hey there, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. My name's Dan Bradley, and today I'm joined by a couple of fantastic executives and leadership experts. We're geared up to have a fabulous conversation. So today we're going to discuss the role that culture plays in attracting and growing talent and how that ultimately determines the degree of success that a company is going to experience. But before we dive into that, we are the Talent War Group's Leadership Collective. We are a leader's source for building elite teams and managing the most important asset on any organization's balance sheet, which is human capital. We're an organization of experts who share their lessons learned and insights on talent management, leadership, organizational development, and more. But we rely on your support, and we wouldn't be here without it. So if you like what you hear, share it with your connections and your contacts, and reach out to connect with all of the members of our team. If you have any questions or comments while we're going throughout today's discussion, please send them through the chat function. We'll put them on the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to address them as we move through today's discussion. So today's episode is sponsored by the Talent War Group, management consulting and executive search firm, and by the Ford School. The Ford School is located in Benton, Tennessee, and is a residential treatment center for teen boys aged 13 to 17. Their 24 beds are for short-term stays of 45 days. And are an insurance reimbursement or private pay program. Ford School has a truly fantastic mission. I cannot encourage you enough to go check them out. You can find out more information on their website at www.fordschoolrtc.com by calling their admissions line at 866-481-4403 or by visiting them on social media, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. So, today, I'm very excited and very grateful to be joined by two of our panelists, Mike Sorelli and special guest, Bob Pragada. Mike is the founder and CEO of the Talent War Group. He is a retired Navy SEAL officer and former recon Marine and Scout Sniper. He's the co-author of The Talent War, How Special Operations and Great Organizations Win on Talent, and is also a featured writer for Men's Journal and Men's Fitness with his Everyday Warrior column. Mike, thank you very much for being here.
You got me right as I was taking a sip. Thank you for having me on.
Timing is everything. And of course, our special guest, Mr. Bob Pragada. He is the president and COO of Jacobs Engineering. Jacobs is a 55,000 employee organization which partners with governments, cities, businesses, and agencies in more than 50 countries worldwide. Bob is a Naval Academy graduate who served as a Navy Seabee in the Navy Civil Corps of Engineers. In addition to the Naval Academy, he's a graduate of Stanford University and the University of Michigan. Mr. Pragada sits on and leads various boards of directors, including the Naval Academy Foundation, the Dallas Regional Chamber, and the U.S.-India Business Council. Bob was also recently recognized with the 2021 Chief Officer Award by Washington Exec, and we are absolutely thrilled to have him joining us today. Bob, thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Only one correction in that, well, it's several, but of those special guests, I don't know if special was really applicable, but it's great to be here with you and Mike.
Always appreciate that and appreciate the humility. Well, guys, today the topic is culture and establishing it as a catalyst for talent. As we sit here today in July of 2021, the world is starting to look and feel a little bit more like it used to back before the global pandemic. You've got restaurants opening. People are going to ball games and concerts. You've been to the Texas Rangers game. They're sold out almost every night or close to it. Restrictions are being lifted around the country. One place that's not starting to feel like it did pre-pandemic is the workplace. So during COVID, a lot of companies had to shift pretty rapidly from a traditional in-person office setting to a remote model. And a dramatic shift like that can mean a lot of uncertainty and turbulence for companies that aren't firmly rooted in their cultural foundation. Things that we used to take for granted, like building trust, forming relationships, communicating simply, and even just balancing commitments at work versus commitments at home, became a lot more complicated practically overnight. So that dramatic shift really highlighted, maybe more than anything else, the importance of culture in an organization. Companies that were grounded in their culture but still adaptable to external forces seemed to thrive in the uncertainty of the 2020 business climate, while companies that hadn't been intentional about building a solid culture or which hadn't recruited and retained their talent based upon their culture tended to struggle. That's because a positive and unwavering company culture provides a bedrock from which employees can operate with confidence, knowing that despite whatever external factors are influencing their market, we have a steady set of processes and values that they can act in accordance with confidently. Now, one of those companies that has a firm culture is Jacobs Engineering. I'm going to throw this over to Bob for his thoughts on the topic of culture, both from his military experience and his vast background in private industry. So Bob, when you're talking about Jacobs Engineering, how would you define your culture?
I'd simply stated, I'd define it as a purpose-driven culture. We're a company that does great work for our clients. However, in today's world, that's kind of a rite of entry, and people feel attracted and want to stay with companies that have purpose in the world. And that's really, if you look at what we do for our clients and what our clients are doing for the world, our fundamental mission is to make the world a better place to live, whether it be infrastructure, national security, designing and building world-class facilities that manufacture vaccines that save the world, vaccines and therapies. We're in the middle of all of that and much more. So I think that's a big piece of our being is being purpose-driven.
Now, on this panel today, we've got backgrounds from the Air Force, the Marine Corps, and the Navy, as well as backgrounds from various levels of responsibility in private industry. So for Mike and Bob, with all of your varying experiences and cultures, what are some of the similarities or differences that you've noticed between what you would quantify as a positive culture in the military and a positive culture in private industry? Mike, I'll throw it to you first.
We had this conversation, Bob. We're actually writing a book right now on culture and leadership amongst 5 authors. We decided to have fun with this. Brian Decker, who's a former SF officer, director of player development for the Indianapolis Colts, Rich DeVinny, who wrote the book's Attributes. We served in the SEAL teams, George, my co-author of Talent War, and then Tom Lokar. So when people talk about cultures, good culture, bad culture, you know what? That's in the eye of the beholder. At the end of the day, there's just culture. And Peter Drucker said it best, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I've heard that amended within the last few years, and I heard somebody say, while culture may eat strategy for breakfast, behavior eats culture for lunch. And ultimately, we have these espoused values that we believe as leaders define our cultures. But I guarantee, and this is interesting to think about, is when Bob walks into the room or some other office within Jacobs, people probably sit up a little more upright and act a little differently, and that's not necessarily a reflection of the culture. It's ultimately what they do when the bosses aren't around. And I can only imagine how difficult that is within a 55,000 employee organization. I'd be interested to ask Bob, what role does leadership play within defining a culture and with an organization your size? Really, how are you relying on the leaders of the subcultures and the different multi-unit locations you have to drive home the values that we believe Jacobs to be?
Standing behind your word. We, especially in corporate America today, you can get everything from an ESG statement, an inclusion statement, a diversity statement, all of these statements that define a company and get put into fancy books around mission, vision, and values are only words, and employees get it. So when those are backed up by real actions with real results, people follow because they know that it's real. I'll give you an example, Mike. I literally just read this in a news feed. It was a gentleman that said, "I don't want to read your inclusion statement. I want to read about your retention statistics and your pay gap statistics, and all of those types of real lagging indicators that show that the company just doesn't say it, they do it, and it starts with the top."
Well, I like to say, because we're both in Texas, all 3 of us are in Texas. In Texas, it's a lot of people are all hat, no cattle. I absolutely agree with you, Bob. It's what you do. It's not what you say. It's what you do. And in fact, I thought not Mark Andreessen, Ben Horowitz wrote a great book about this. It's not what you say. It's what you do. I'd be interested, and especially for all the business leaders who are not running 55,000 employee organizations, how often are you guys talking about culture? I know with the executive leadership team, how often are you talking about it at all levels of the organization?
Within pretty much every conversation, both Mike explicitly as well as how we talk, what we talk about, how we make people feel. That's all part of us displaying the culture. And so I'd liken it to safety in our company 15 years ago, where we actually, even, and to full disclosure, we would have our, okay, today I'm going to do my safety walk, or safety is on my checklist of things to do, so I'm going to check it off. And it was a very tactical, very rote way of looking at safety. And then we had a huge awakening. The awakening was the explosion that happened in Texas City for British Petroleum, for BP, and killed 11 employees, and 11 Jacobs employees. And then we woke up and we said, look, we're not going to get our arms around safety until we have a fundamental value for human life and make it a part of everything that we do. And once it becomes ingrained in our culture, then we can start to actually stand up for what we believe in. And so that transcended to where today, yes, we talk about safety, but we talk about all elements of safety. For example, Dan, you were talking about what's happening, what's happened to all of us around the world for the last 18 months. The mental health safety aspects of that have been, I think that's the pandemic that's going to continue with us forever. And so culturally at Jacobs, we address it. We hit it head on. We have mental health champions around the world. We talk about mental health. We tell people, hey, it's okay not to be okay. And let's have that critical conversation about things that are really affecting who you are. And so I think, I'm droning on here, Mike, but I think to talk about culture is, again, probably a surface related item. To live it is really what we're driving.
Hey, Dan, one more question, because as we're writing this book, amongst the five of us, we had this question, and there was much debate. Is culture one and done, where you create your culture and it's set, or is it something you view, especially in the wake of COVID, is culture that is something that needs to evolve?
I think it's evolve is probably a good word to reference it. I would say that it's foundational, and it continues to build on each other. And I'll give you an example, Mike. We started about 6 years ago when we really, felt like the company, it's a great company, 70 years in existence. But from a strategy standpoint, we felt like we needed to go to another level, and we looked at our culture first. And what had been a bit diluted over time, for no malintent, was these concepts of accountability with empowerment, right? So we focused all of our efforts in on, okay, how do we structure ourselves? How do we build a culture of accountability with empowerment? And then we kind of moved from that element into, well, wait a second. In order for us to feel empowered, we need to feel included, right? And we also saw ourselves and said, well, wait a second. We're all starting to look alike and think alike, and how are we going to optimize the power of the company unless we created a more diverse environment and a more diverse elements to our culture? So the next kind of foundational element doesn't mean that empowerment and accountability goes away. We then really started to inoculate ourselves with strong inclusion and diversity, and then the world is changing, and innovation and the digitization of everything is now upon us. So we built a culture of innovation, right? It didn't absolve us from all of those other elements. It's just building blocks over time that builds our culture, and it continues to. I'm going to go back and say you did have the right word, evolve. It does evolve over time.
Now, Bob, when you talk about that, sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you make a great point, Bobby. I think building upon one another is probably the more accurate, because there's certain foundational things that don't change.
No.
Your values shouldn't change. So thank you for that perspective. Dan, sorry, go ahead.
No, not a problem. Now, Bob, what you're talking about is shifting culture and that being desirable, having being able to identify that you're lacking diversity in your teams, lacking diversity of thought. When you're having that desirable shift, is that something deliberate that you sit down and say, okay, we have to shift our culture, we have to make these adjustments? Or is that something that almost drags, like, is it a lagging thing? How would you approach that?
All perfect intention to make it deliberate. And then being very, very intentional about how we infiltrate in the entirety of the organization, because words are back to what Mike asked before. Words are words, but then what are we doing for our employees with regards to our programs, our training, the experiences that they have access to, the tools that we use in order to deliver service and value to our clients? All of those have to be in line with our culture. And so all of that in itself then ends up really starting to grasp hold within the organization.
Now, Bob, that kind of leads into a great question that we received from one of our viewers prior to the beginning of today's conversation, from a gentleman named Ranadeep Kumar. Now, he asks, Jacobs is a large company, workforce of 55,000 plus, operates basically as hundreds of individual performance units offering a wide breadth of services. How do you track the success of Jacobs values being implemented at various levels when we're talking about, you had mentioned retention statistics, pay gap, mental health initiatives? How do you track the success of Jacobs values being implemented at various levels? And I'll add this part to it. How do you identify that it is time to make that deliberate culture shift because of those measures?
Yeah. A whole variety of things. Some of the, the most tactical elements, Dan, we do culture surveys? Do we seek feedback from our employees? Do we do town halls? What are our employees saying? And what are they, what kind of feedback are we getting? But if I had to synthesize it down to a single performance indicator, it's growth, right? It's growth. Now that has an A and a B and a C and everything else, but growth of the business, growth from our relationship with our clients, growth in the community. Everything comes back to growth, human growth, personal growth. That actually was our wake-up call back 5+ years ago. Was we weren't growing as a company, and we came out of the recession, and we knew that we were a great company. We knew that we could be really not only beating our competition, but having a positive influence in the world. But something wasn't really getting us to the next level, and that was the wake up call.
Fantastic. We've got another viewer question that I think matches in perfectly with what we're talking about. The question is more from a mid-level management perspective, rather than a CEO, COO, CXO, whatever perspective. So if you're in a mid-level position and conversations on culture aren't happening at the executive level, how can those mid-level leaders go about approaching senior leaders and conveying that need?
It happens all the time here. Is that I would say be courageous. Be courageous and be bold. If you feel strongly that the company is not putting their money where their mouth is, or backing, what the stated culture is of the company, then I think it's all of whether you're senior level, mid level, entry level. It's all of our responsibility to speak up and speak out.
Mike, any thoughts on that as well? It's just a fantastic question coming from Gunny.
That's a tough one, especially if I'm coming from a mid-level management position. I'm trying to lead up the chain of command and get that conversation started with my bosses, guys like Bob. One, hopefully I've built the relationship with those bosses to sit down and say, hey, I'd just love to get your thoughts, indirect ways, about what the culture is at said name company and our company, and what I can do from my perspective to help build upon that, or drive home the values that we hold dear. That is a long fight, Success doesn't happen overnight. And I think this actually, I'd love to segue, Bob, to this question, because I think I'm falling into this trap. Hey, we're a startup. I just retired. We're probably checking our bank account every day, and sort of the extrinsic things like the values, clients, sales funnel, conversion rates. What would your advice to senior leaders be about how often you've got to step back from all the metrics, the KPIs, and really look at the intrinsic, the intrinsic culture of the organization, engage things where they're at and how they need to improve culturally? I mean, how often are you doing that?
As often as I humanly possible. Pre-pandemic, I would make it a point to make sure that I got to as many locations in a quarter as possible. If I was going out to see a client, I try to hit as many locations where we have people in order to see and speak to and seek feedback of our people. You'd think that when the world shut down and we were doing this, talking to people on a screen, that might have slowed down. It went into warp speed, because now the access is, Bob's not getting on a flight, or Steve or any one of our leaders having to get on a flight and go to, Adelaide, Australia to meet with folks. He's just staying up late at night or getting up early in the morning and making sure that he's got an opportunity to talk to a whole host of folks. So, some of the silver shoots that have come out of the pandemic, silver linings, green shoots. Did I get that right?
You're good.
Great things that have come out of the pandemic is that connectivity. But I think that connectivity, to be prescriptive about it and say, you know what, Mike, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make sure that I hit 4 sites in a month. Likelihood, you're not, right? You're going to get 5 one, 0 another, 10 maybe the next one. But just to make sure that it's a routine. It's routine and you're visible. Stay visible. We learned that in the military. Both Dan, Mike, all of us did. Is visible leaders are more connected to their people. And leading behind a desk did get you nowhere.
That is a great point. However, I think it falls on deaf ears with some military commanders. I remember on some deployments, it was almost like our commanding officer would come out every few weeks, and it was almost to the point of like, "Hey, sir, we're good. Go elsewhere." But then there was others that, for that 6-month deployment, wouldn't be seen. So that's a great point for a lot of the business leaders in doing the management consulting. Working with some lower level to mid level subordinate leaders that are like, we never see our boss. I don't know who they are. Well, I know who they are. I just have no relationship. So If you're listening, get out there, be seen. General Mattis was well known for visiting the front to get the perspectives.
Mike, one more point on this, because it's an important one that I should have said before. I also think that it's important, my own personal philosophy. I also think it's important for leaders to be vulnerable and not purport to have all the answers and be the expert at everything. I think when teams see that the strength of the team comes from the unique position or contribution that every member of the team can make, that builds strong teams. And so, that flattening out of the organization, and we even did it. Everyone thinks that the military is completely a command and control and vertically oriented. It's not. And the best units that I ever belonged to in the military are no different than the best units that I belong to in the private sector. And those are teams that lean on each other for what they can contribute.
Let's narrow in on this point, Dan, because I want everyone to double down on this. For if they take anything away from this, vulnerability. A national level corporate leader just said you have to be vulnerable. And to echo what you said, General, and I'm blanking on his name. We interviewed him in the book. It'll come to me. Was a founding member of Delta Force, and he talked about an emotional intimacy amongst their operators. And at first, that sounds very odd, that a bunch of Delta Force operators would have this emotional intimacy. But he said what it came down to was the ability to be vulnerable without fear of condemnation or retribution. But in fact, people would wrap their arms around that individual and say, hey, well, how can we help? How can we help you learn from this? So that is so powerful. You cannot have a culture of trust unless that vulnerability is gained. And senior leaders like yourself have to demonstrate that from the start. We've got a few more questions. I've got to ask because we only have so much time with you. You're a Naval Academy graduate, one of the finest institutions in our land, behind West Point.
Oh,
Mike, I didn't mean bad language. Bad language. I know. I've got a lot of West Point friends. Hey, I'm a Navy person.
Oh,
how impactful was your time at the Naval Academy on you as a leader to today?
I'm trying to say this in the most sincere way I can possibly say it, Mike. In my life, not just in my career, in my life, the Naval Academy has been the most impactful 4-year period that I've ever had. And I'm not saying that I learned everything there. I'm not saying that it gave me 100% of the skills to go off and serve in the military and serve in corporate America, or be a wife and a husband and I could be a wife as well, a husband and a father and a son and a nephew. But it had that impact. It had that impact that, the whole concept of camaraderie in teams and putting forth the very best effort that you possibly can put forth in any situation, caring, all of the attributes now that I use daily in my personal and in my professional life, where I'm not saying that I didn't have those before I went to Annapolis, but those 4 years that I was there, they really got fine-tuned and really set me up well for the rest of my life. Hence the reason why, it's about giving back. And I sit on the board of the Naval Academy Foundation for exactly that reason, to make sure that young men and women around the country, around the world, have those same opportunities that I did.
You graduated class of 1990, is that correct?
Did.
One of the best leaders that I ever served for, a guy named Admiral Wyman Howard, who's still active duty.
He's a good buddy of mine.
Good. Okay. So, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. One last question. I'll turn it back over to Dan for a few of these questions. Can that culture that you find at the Naval Academy or within the military, can that be replicated within the business world? Or can we get pretty damn close?
Absolutely can. It absolutely can. I say that with high level of resolution. It's and I'll tell you, of a variety of reasons why I think you can. The one that rises to the top is this, and it comes back to inclusion and diversity. Regardless of what the media says, or the impressions, or whatever rumors are there, at the Naval Academy, I never felt more included than at any other time in my life. I grew up for the first part of my life in the South, in the late 60s and all through the 70s and early 80s. I moved to Chicago with my single parent in Chicago. And when I got to the Naval Academy, it didn't matter what gender you were, what color you were, if you had 4 noses. If you delivered and you could contribute, whether it be on the athletic field or in the classroom, or on the parade field, or whatever exercise we were doing, that's all that mattered.
Beautiful.
Now, guys, we got a question here from Dave Cochran, who is also here in Dallas. He's asking, how do you vet culturally aligned people and partners? So let me preface this question a little bit. Bob, when you got off the bus at the Naval Academy on day one, I'm assuming they didn't ask you how you felt about their culture. I know I wasn't asked that question. Mike, when you're on the teams, they didn't ask you how you felt about the culture of special operations. They said, this is the culture. When you were going through the process of vetting to get into these institutions or into these groups, how did you feel you're being measured on culture fit? And how do you, your teams now, measure for culture when you're figuring out what kind of talent you want or what kind of partners you want to work with?
Mike, you want to go first?
Okay.
Not all well played.
I'll take a stab at
it. So let me address the culture fit, and I think that is something that's wildly misunderstood. I'm a trust but verify type of guy, and I'm not quick to say whether I like somebody or dislike somebody. I think I generally dislike everyone from the start, and then slowly work towards liking certain people. But what I try to find, regardless of whether somebody is likable or dislikable, is do their values align with mine? And if I initially dislike somebody, it may just be that they're being wildly authentic. They may be a just dry person in terms of social ability, but if their values align, as Bob said, they're contributing, then I know I can build a relationship with them, identifying that they're authentic in their own way. But I'm very cautious of being sold in an interview by somebody who's overly articulate. Yes, the ability to communicate is a key, ability of all leaders, but it really comes down to who the person is and whether they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And in an interview, that can be tough to do. But we're always assessing everyone within our organization. Even if we let them pass the front door, we hire them or we select them into our community, everyone should always be or continue to be assessed to make sure that their values still align with the culture and what we're trying to achieve and how we're trying to achieve it, more importantly.
So, Mike, let me give you your readback on that. Culture fit is not just an initial gate; it's a constant assessment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm sure Bob is being evaluated by the board, and they should. Just like every CEO is getting evaluated by their board. Does this person, do their values still align with the organization? Do they represent the organization in the best light? And are they making the ethical and moral decisions for what's best for the company and all the people within it, to include the shareholders?
Mike, I thought you said it great. I may come at it from a slightly different angle, where, let me back up 1 second, is that I always start from a position of trust with people, and then allow for that trust to hold or abate. And when I was doing the as Dave was saying, the vetting, one was, and you're a 17-year-old kid or young man, sorry, and so am I going to be happy there? Because you're right. Am I going to be happy individually in that culture, which is you're not going to shape the culture. The culture is going to shape you. So check on that from a vetting process. And then second, I'm going to go in with a level of trust. Am I going to be taken advantage of? Or is that trust not even going to hold, but is it going to even build and to be even greater? And I would say within, actually, probably after the first day, it's called, I don't know, Dan, if they called it in Colorado Springs, I-Day. They called it Induction Day in Annapolis. And so, it was I-Day in the room, scared out of your mind on what's going on outside. And my roommate said to me, he was an Ecuadorian foreign national student. And he was pretty scared too, and pretty far away from home. And he looked over at me, he says, hey, Pragata, are you okay? Do you need any help from me? And it was it. That was it. And my natural instinct was to ask him, the same question in return. And so it just kind of built from there.
Fantastic. Guys, we're at a point in this discussion where we're going to go for saved rounds. Any final comments that you want to address before we start wrapping this up? I'll shoot mine out first. My saved round is one word: VUCA. So all of our businesses operate in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. In a VUCA environment, to grow, you have to be able to adapt, you have to be able to adjust, not just how you're going out and tracking your talent, but how you're managing your culture internally. So to hit on a point that both of you brought up earlier, to grow in an environment like that, you have to be able to adapt, adjust, and shift your culture in a progressive way. So guys, I'll pass it on to you. Mike, are you ready for your save round?
Bob gets last word. I think it's really encouraging to, again, hear Bob at the level that he leads, to talk about vulnerability, which I think a lot of people misconstrue. Being vulnerable is actually the toughest thing for anyone to do. You don't lose your man card, so to speak, as we say, by allowing yourself to be vulnerable. And in fact, the more you allow yourself to be vulnerable, I think the more empathetic you become as a human, to truly understanding other people and allowing them to understand you. So Bob, thank you for all the leaders listening in. Thank you for reinforcing that point I've learned. Thank you.
Yeah, I would probably end with belief, constant and continuous, and not unfounded or rogue belief, but grounded belief in humanity and the goodness in people and in the world and what we can achieve together as a global society is something that, you know, every culture is made up of. Some want to take advantage and capitalize on it. Others don't. But strong belief in the future is very, very important.
All right, thank you guys both very much, and Bob, of course, can't thank you enough for joining us today. To our viewers, the engagement today was absolutely fantastic. We had a lot of comments that we're not going to be able to get to within the time constraints we've got today, but we're gonna take note of these. These will be the topics of future engagements. These will be the topics of blogs that are coming out. So stay tuned to what the Talent War Group and the Leadership Collective have coming out. We will absolutely get to your points. So what we've got coming up next is the Command Suite session. The next session is August 24th at 11 a.m. The title is going to be Communication, Culture, Climate, and Competition. So a little bit building off of what we've talked about here today. Speakers at that event are going to be Josh Johnson, Craig Kuznetsky, Mike Hertzendorf, Ron Culpepper, and Andrew Cece, and their conversation is going to aim to give you a deeper insight into effective communication between units within an organization, eliminating those silos, emphasizing and relating the impact of culture upon teamwork, and a few other topics in line with those foundational ones. So thank you again for taking the time to join us today, and special thanks to the Talent War Group as well as the Forge School for sponsoring today's conversation. Guys, before you sign out, check out a link below. There's a form so that you can give us some feedback on these types of events. That allows us to improve your experience and provide you even more valuable content. As always, feel free to connect with us and any of our Talent War Group Leadership Collective members on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you can find us. Share our posts in these sessions with your organizations, your connections, your family and friends if you like what you hear. And if you want to improve yourself, your team, your organization, any of our team members are available to work directly with you to find success. So go ahead and check out talentwargroup.com to learn more. Once again, thank you very much to Mike, and of course to our special guest, Mr. Bob Pagata. Thank you so much for your time.
Dan, Mike, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Dan.